In our last video, we introduced you to our first time intelligence function, DatesYTD. It allowed us to calculate running totals of our expenses and income for the current year in our report, which is 2019. But suppose that we want to look backward and compare our finances to what they were in the previous year. In the financial world, this is known as year-over-year analysis, or YOY. In this video, we'll show you some of the functions you can use to do these yearly comparisons and how you can visualize them. Our DAX journey continues as we define more and more measures. Hopefully by this point you're getting more comfortable with DAX and you can recognize what these functions are doing for your analytical and reporting capabilities in Power BI Desktop. Let's start by creating a year-over-year measure for expenses. We'll click New Measure on the Home tab to open our formula bar, and we'll name it Expenses PY, where PY means previous year. And we'll calculate expenses again, but we'll use this new time intelligence function called Same Period Last Year. Similar to the DatesYTD function that we used in the last video, Same Period Last Year returns a column of dates, but the dates are shifted 1 year back in time. So if our slicer says 2019, which it does, this function will return dates from 2018. Then, let's do the same thing for the previous year's income. And now let's plot these new measures on our table to see what the numbers look like. We'll put each previous year measure next to its counterpart, so they're easy to compare. Notice how our table is now displaying a row for all 12 months, but the measures where we're using 2019 data are only filled in through September, and our new previous year measures are giving us the 2018 data for all 12 months. This is what Same Period Last Year does. It gives us the ability to do year-over-year calculations and comparisons. Now let's add a second page to our report so we can visualize what we've created so far. We'll go to our year slicer on page 1 and make sure to sync it to page 2 using the sync slicers functionality we learned with our basketball data. Then let's add a clustered column chart to page 2, put the month on the axis, and add our expenses and expenses PY measures to the values. We should get a chart where the two measures are plotted side by side within each month. This is why this chart is referred to as clustered. Our measures are displayed alongside each other. If we had chosen a stacked column chart, the measures would be stacked on top of each other, basically adding them together rather than allowing us to compare them. For comparisons like we're doing here, the clustered column chart is the way to go because it allows for the side-by-side comparison that we need. Take note of the legend for our chart and which color represents our current year expenses versus our previous year expenses. Then, let's copy this chart. We're going to select it and click Control-C, then Control-V to paste. Once our second chart is created, we're going to replace the expense measures with our income measures, so we get a similar chart for income. If we're examining our income and expenses purely month to month, this isn't a bad visualization, but it requires a little bit of thought because you need to remember which shade represents which year. We can see some obvious events like huge expenses in May of 2018, and we can see our monthly income increasing starting in July of 2019. An area chart would be another way of looking at this data, but I think there's a better way of visualizing the year-over-year differences. Let's start by calculating year-to-date expenses for the previous year so we can compare the current year-to-date with the previous year-to-date. We're going to use the Same Period Last Year function like we did earlier, but this time our first argument, which is the expression we want to evaluate with our outer calculate function, is going to be changed from our expenses measure to expenses YTD. And then we'll do the same thing with income, creating an income previous year year-to-date measure. Once the measures are created, let's add 2 area charts to our report and position each one above our clustered column charts. We'll add month to the axis of both charts, but on the left-hand chart, we'll first add our expenses PY/YTD measure, and then we'll add the expenses YTD measure. The order in which we add the measures to our value section of the area chart determines their placement from back to front, so the first measure you add is in the back, and every measure you add after that gets placed on top of it. We're doing the YTD measure first because we want it to be in the background of the chart, and then we're going to overlay the current year on top of it. This will make the comparison a bit easier because we want to prioritize the current year's data. That's why we're adding the previous year's measure first. Next, let's go into our format settings for this chart and do a little light editing. We'll click the paint roller icon on our visualizations pane to see the format settings. Then, let's go to data colors and change our previous year measure to a light gray color. We're making a visual comparison easier by increasing the color contrast between the previous year's data and the current year's data. Then, for one last tweak, we're going to look at our shape settings. These allow you to change the appearance of the lines in our area chart. You can change the width of the line, make the line dashed or dotted, or add markers at each month, like a dot or a diamond, to make them easier to see. Here, we're going to change the previous year measure to do a dotted line. To do that, we're going to change the Customize Series option from off to on, then select Expenses PY/YTD from the drop-down menu, and change the line style drop-down from solid to dotted. And now our data series for the previous year's expenses is represented by a gray dotted line. Once again, we're trying to create a greater visual contrast between the current year and the previous year. By doing so, we're making it easier for our audience to distinguish these measures from each other, thus making it easier for our audience to interpret what's happening in the data. In this particular case, we see very similar trends in expenses from year to year, with a large increase in expenses for 1 month each year, and then the expenses resume a very steady rate of monthly increase. Let's duplicate this chart by selecting it, then click Ctrl-C to copy and Ctrl-V to paste. We'll remove the expense measures and add in the income measures, starting first with income PY/YTD and then adding income YTD. Then let's adjust the data colors, making income YTD our green shade and changing income PY/YTD to light gray. And finally, we'll once again customize the shape settings for our previous year measure, changing the line style from solid to dotted. We should now have 2 charts that show our cumulative totals of expenses and income year over year. Another good way of visualizing this data would be to use a clustered column chart like we did earlier for our non-cumulative data. We can just select each of these charts and change them by clicking the clustered column chart from our menu. They transform automatically with the colors staying exactly the same, and the side-by-side appearance of the columns makes it easy to see the differences between them. There's one minor drawback though. When I hover over a month in the area chart and it displays a tooltip, it gives me both the current year and previous year amounts inside the tooltip for easy comparison. Unfortunately, this isn't possible with the clustered column chart because you can only hover over one column at a time, so you can only see one value in the tooltip. These are the kind of things you need to consider when building a report for your audience. As you can see from this lesson, time intelligence functions in DAX allow you to perform comparisons over different periods that may reveal some interesting insights into your data. With the measures that we've defined here, we could also do year-over-year variance measures by subtracting the previous year from the current year. Take some time to explore and experiment with the various time intelligence functions, because you should find them very useful for a wide range of analytical purposes.